Larry Lewis. Missing 06/09/40-10 a.m. South Fork Mokelumne River, Calaveras
County, CA.
Age at disappearance, 5 years. Mr. and Mrs. Harold Lewis had traveled from their home in Lodi, California, to take their 4 children to the Sherman Campground in Calaveras County, California. The family had planned a trout fishing trip to the South Fork of the Mokelumne River. On June 9, 1940, in the early morning hours, the Lewises traveled to the river, and Mr. Lewis took the kids fishing upstream. After a short time, he told the children to walk downstream to their
camp, and he would meet them there.
Mr. Lewis walked downriver, back to his family's camp, and found only 3 kids. Larry was
missing.
A search was made of the surrounding campground and river area, and Larry could not be located. The United States Forest Service and the Calaveras County Sheriff's Office were notified and started a search. By early afternoon on June 9th, there were over 100 searchers looking for Larry Lewis. Sheriff Joe Zwinge managed the search for Larry and found nothing of the young boy by the end of the first night of searching. Starting the following morning, the sheriff put more searchers on the line and worked through the day, utilizing help from almost every community in the area. At 4 p.m. on June 10th, searchers made a startling discovery. A June 11th article in the Lodi News Sentinel explained what Calaveras County searchers found. According to Sheriff Joe Zwinge, who reported the finding of the child, the boy had climbed up a mountain from the riverbed for about 11,000 feet and had traveled approximately 3 miles. In his wanderings, the place where he was found was about 3/4 of a mile from a camp situated on the South Fork of the Mokelumne River near a bridge. It was near the highway which runs from Railroad Flat to West Point. The boy had crawled in the thicket to sleep, the sheriff said. He was carried out by Kearns and Restoed read to his family. Summary: the distance that Larry traveled is truly unbelievable. 11,000 feet is almost 2 miles of walking uphill. The idea that Larry had to travel uphill for a phenomenal distance is understandable once you look at the river in this area. Many of the riverbanks are almost straight up and down. One last item that needs to be addressed is the location and condition that Larry was found in. He was found sleeping in a thicket, a condition and ication that continues to replicate itself time after time in the missing persons cases that we present. I will never believe that small children will purposely cause injury to themselves by entering a thicket. The act of entering the thicket means that kids are getting scratched. It does not make sense. Clarence Murphy Jr. Missing 07/14/41 a.m. Camp Sacramento, California. Age at disappearance, for years. The disappearance of Clarence Murphy Jr. ranks in the top 20 of the most unusual cases I have ever investigated. The incident occurred in an area I know well as it's along Highway 50, a highway I've traveled hundreds of times. Clarence Murphy Jr. was the older son of Mr. and Mrs. Clarence Murphy of Sacramento. The Murphys made the 86-mile DRI/IE east along Highway So, one of 2 major California highways that cut through the Central Sierras. The Murphys were headed for Camp Sacramento, a recreational area owned and managed by the City of Sacramento's Park and Recreation Department, which featured cabins, dining halls, play areas, hiking trails, campfire pits, and volleyball courts. The camp was established in 1920 and sits idyllically along the southern banks of the South Fork of the American River. The camp is just east of Twin Bridges, which is just east of Strawberry. The camp sits just south of the Desolation Wilderness area and a region with miles and miles of exposed granite and hundreds of small lakes and creeks at an elevation of 6,100 feet. The Murphys arrived at the camp on Sunday, July 13th. On Monday morning, Clarence and his mother, Carrie, went to the playground and Clarence was playing in the sand. Carrie had to do the family's
Laundry.
She gave Clarence directions to stay in the sand, and she'd be back in just a few minutes. Carrie arrived back at the sand pit and couldn't find Clarence. Mrs. Murphy immediately asked for camp assistance, and within a short period of time, the entire counseling staff was looking for the 4-year-old. After an intensive hour-long search, the El Dorado County Sheriff was called to assist. By mid-afternoon on July 14th, the El Dorado Sheriff had summoned further assistance from the California Highway Patrol and the United States Forest Service. It wasn't long before a massive call-up for assistance
Was made.
Then the clouds opened up, and a major storm hit the Camp Sacramento area. Rain poured for several hours in the Echo, Summit, Strawberry, and Twin Bridges areas. The water in the surrounding creeks and rivers rose, and the temperature was dropping. Searchers continued nonstop for 3 days, without finding a clue of Ch1 Rence's whereabouts. There were reports that a woman saw a young boy standing on Highway 50, but this was never confirmed. Bloodhounds tracked Clarence's scent to the banks of the American River and to an adjacent roadway. Neither led to anything. There was a small pond on the camp's property that was searched no less than 5 times, nothing found. The concern for Clarence was clearly expressed in a July 17th article in the Oakland Tribune. Elmer Congdon, Sacramento Recreation Superintendent, expressed belief the child is still alive and had been picked up by motorists or been kidnapped. His theory was supported by the boy's father and by Deputy Sheriff Bodie Martin of El Dorado County. Searchers had no leads and were basing their beliefs on
Hope.
Also on July 17th, searchers stated that they had combed the rugged country for miles around the camp. Nevada State Journal, July 17, 1941. This last statement by searchers is interesting in that they were looking in all areas. The region behind the camp to the south is very rugged and gets remote quickly. There are no roads behind the camp for many miles, just open and wild forest. The search for Clarence continued formally for 2 weeks and informally for 2 more. The disappearance was the first major incident in the 21-year history of Camp Sacramento. There were no leads in the disappearance of Clarence Murphy, Jr. for 13 months. On September 22, 1942, deer hunter Clarence Larson had just killed his first deer of the season and was riding on his horse carrying his buck when he saw a small white shoe on the ground. Larson knew of the Murphy disappearance. He dismounted, picked up the shoe, and contacted the El Dorado County Sheriff. On Thursday, September 24th, a team of sheriff's deputies, Clarence's father, and California Highway Patrol set off on foot into the rugged area behind Camp Sacramento. Larson led the group to an area 2 miles south and 2,000 feet up in elevation. He took them to an area he felt the shoe was found, where the group spread out and started to search. The team eventually found a location away from the shoe where they located small, scattered bone fragments and very small remnants of cloth. It was the remains of Clarence Murphy. An October 1942, article in the Mountain Democrat described the find. The area is described by Undersheriff Nell Gray as fairly rough country, and the ridge in which the little skeleton was found ends at Lovers Leap near Strawberry. The article states that the boy died of exposure and exhaustion. Later in the same article, it states youth. Conclusion is based on the reports of the posse, which found the remains of the child as described being on top of a ridge a mile south and 2,000 feet higher than Sacramento's municipal camp. A September 24, 1942, article in the Oakland Tribune states this about Clarence's shoe. The shoe, found 2 miles south of the camp by a deer hunter, was not definitely identified by either of the child's parents. The article later states that the sheriff was Sure, the shoe belonged to Clarence. The area where Clarence's body was found is very, very rugged. I guarantee it. If you have the opportunity, go to Google Maps, look at Twin Bridges, and follow the river east to Camp Sacramento. You will see Lover's Leap, a giant piece of granite that reminds me of something you'd see in Yosemite. It is huge. Going south from the Leap, you will see a ridgeline that summits at 8,100 feet. The east side of the ridge is nearly vertical unless you travel further south, thus making the walk for Clarence many more miles and unbelievable feat for the 4-year-old. I have been in this area, and it is rough with many miles of exposed granite, making for treacherous hiking with dangerous drop-offs. Mr. Larson was smart to bring a horse, as that would be the only way I'd make the climb that quickly. In that elevation.
Summary.
The cause of Clarence's death is a mere guess. The bones were described as fragments with small remnants of clothing. There was no positive way to determine the cause of death. This case closely resembles the disappearance of David Allen Scott on July 17, 1953, in Mono Village just outside the eastern edge of Yosemite National Park. 2-year-old David disappeared from his family's camping site and was eventually found 3,000 feet up an extremely steep mountain, dead. See missing 411 Western United
States. I
wish I could interview one of the searchers who found Clarence. It doesn't take the smartest investigator to realize that a 4-year-old boy doesn't voluntarily make the journey Clarence Murphy made, if he even could have made it. Remember, searchers had earlier made a statement just after Clarence vanished that they had searched the mountain area in the range where a boy that age could have reached. Here is their exact statement from the Mountain Democrat of July 17, 1941. Since Monday, the hillsides in the Bison Idaho have been searched for such distance from the camp as it might be expected a child of his age would wander, and on Tuesday there was a search of the river. Searchers and law enforcement officials had publicly stated that they had concerns that Clarence was kidnapped.
Could their
hunch have been correct? Why would a young boy leave the fun of a sandbox and start walking straight uphill for many miles and continue walking for many miles while the weather was horrible? The distance that Clarence traveled indicated that if he had hiked the distance, he must have continued through the storm and walked for at least 2 to 3 days. This is another example of canines tracking the boy's scent to water, river, and the boy had walked in the exact opposite direction. Roger Schattinger, missing 5/27/51, noon, Truckee, California. Age at disappearance, 9 years. Truckee is approximately 9 miles northeast of Lake Tahoe and is famous for being the town adjacent to where the Donner Party spent its horrific winter from 1847 to 1848. The town of Truckee has an elevation OFS 817 feet, but as you move west and out of the city, the elevation quickly rises. In 2010, the population in Truckee was 19,151, with many more people in the surrounding mountains. The area is a year-round outdoor sports mecca. Snow skiing is a very popular winter sport with Squaw Valley and Alpine Meadows in close proximity, while the summer offers excellent trout fishing in the surrounding creeks, and people can float the Truckee River on tubes. On May 27, 1951, Mr. and Mrs. Harry Schattinger and their son Roger had traveled to Truckee from their residence just outside San Diego for a holiday of fishing and enjoying the Sierras. At approximately noon, Harry and Roger were fishing the small and easily accessible Adler Creek, just on the northwestern edge of Truckee. The location they were fishing has an elevation of 6,600 feet and sits just on the edge of a vast wilderness to their northwest. The region they were fishing had a large meadow and several tall and large pine and Douglas fir trees. Harry soon realized that he hadn't seen Roger and started CHLing his name and searching for him. Adler Creek is a small, long creek that slowly meanders toward Truckee as it travels downstream. Just as Harry was realizing he couldn't find his boy, he started to call for assistance. Placer County sheriffs and Truckee police responded to assist in looking for Roger. Hundreds of community members, deputies, police officers, and firefighters were all looking for the boy. They had searched the area where the Shadingers were fishing and were positive that Roger was nowhere in the area. The continued yells and screams for the boy didn't produce any results. 28 hours after Roger disappeared and 1,000 feet higher in elevation, a special Indian tracker had been brought in by the sheriff. Archie Hicks from Stillwater, Nevada, was hot on the heels of Roger. Archie was in an area where search criteria indicated that Roger probably would not be higher in elevation and 5 miles from the point he was last seen. Archie found Roger alive and in a bush at an elevation of 7,600 feet, 1,000 feet higher in elevation than where he was last seen. Hicks had a short conversation with Roger and asked him why he was in that Io Nation. A May 29, 1951, article in the Nevada STAE. Joe Ernell had the following statement. He told them he had been hiding from the people. On the same day, there was an article in the San Mateo Times where Roger had stated he thought they meant to do him harm. It was never made clear who the people he was hiding from were. Some articles made the implication Roger was hiding from searchers, but that made zero sense.
Just as a side
note, Roger was found barefoot.
Summary.
Roger was found just 9 miles east of the location where Dana Cooper, 13 years old and disabled, disappeared in August 1971. Dana's story was in missing 411 western United States. Roger's location was also just 9 miles from where 2-year-old James Bordenkircher disappeared on the north shore of Lake Tahoe.
In 1965. He was never found.
The region just west of where Roger was found has hundreds of small lakes, very similar to the area where Dana vanished. I've heard stories of small boys stealing they were hiding from people who were following them.
There is never clarity in the
newspaper articles about what the boys were hiding from, possibly purposefully. James Jamie Dwyer Bordenkircher, missing June 12, 65, Beaver Street, Kings Beach, California. Age at disappearance: 2 years. Kings Beach, California, sits at the far northern end of Lake Tahoe, just 1 mile west of the Nevada border. The Bordenkircher residence was located on Beaver Street, 1.5 miles from the shore of Lake Tahoe. Reno Evening Gazette, June 26, 1965. The area behind the residence, in 1965, was thick for 15 miles north until you reached U.S. Highway 80.
The
elevation of Lake Tahoe is 224 feet, and the approximate eleva tie-in of the Bordenkircher residence was 7,000 feet. Mr. and Mrs. Jesse Bordenkircher and their 5 children lived in Yuba City, California, approximately 140 miles west of Lake Tahoe. The family left their residence and drove east on Highway 80, then took the turn southeast toward Lake Tahoe. They drove partially around the lake until they reached the intersection of Beaver Street and Highway 28, where they made a left turn and started to climb toward their cabin. The family drove uphill and climbed nearly 800 feet before turning into the driveway of their cabin. The family was eager to get into the cabin, unload their supplies, and start enjoying the weekend. According to an interview that was completed with the Bordenkircher family and documented on June 17, 2007 in the North Lake Tahoe Bonanza, after the 3 boys and 1 girl piled out of the family car, 2-year-old, blonde-haired Jamie Bordenkircher walked to the wooden-seated swing in the front yard. Jamie's brother, Mike, 18 at the time, ducked inside the cabin for just a moment. When he came back outside, the swing was empty, still swaying gently in the wind. Jamie Bordenkircher had vanished. The Bordenkircher family immediately started to search for the 2-year-old, knowing he couldn't have wandered far in a matter of
seconds.
The family yelled for him, ran due, Dublin Hills up the road, all in a frantic attempt to find the boy. The family searched for 1 hour before they called the Placer County Sheriff's Office. Placer County, in turn, called the Washoe County Sheriff in Nevada, just 1 mile to
the east.
Both jurisdictions were starting to mount one of the largest searches the Lake Tahoe area has ever seen. Deputies initially researched the area around the Bordenkercher
cabin.
They questioned Mike about what he had seen and how long he had been in the cabin. He confirmed that the swing was still swinging when he came back outside, indicating that James had not been gone very long. In the following days, the Coast Guard, which patrols Lake Tahoe, was patrolling the banks of the lake in case Jamie had gone into the water. Divers were put into the lake and searched the underwater banks. 3 different sets of bloodhounds were brought to the cabin, and on each occasion they walked down hill and across busy Highway 28 to a beachfront cabin. Searchers had a tough time believing that Jamie had walked downhill across the highway that quickly, without Mike seeing him. On the downhill slope, the 1.5-mile walk to the lake was long, steep, and not easy to maneuver for someone Jamie's age. The other option was that Jamie walked uphill. Just to the east of the Bordenkercher property was a ridgeline that essentially was the California-Nevada border, probably less than 1,500 feet from their cabin. The ridgeline led further back into TK and deep wilderness, another option that didn't seem likely at the time. While the search for Jamie was being conducted, rain hit the North Lake Tahoe Basin and interrupted search operations. Over the course of 4 days, hundreds of searchers combed the area and searched areas up to 6 times. Searchers went far uphill and north. Into the wilderness, they went downhill toward the lake, and they kept a constant presence in the Kings Beach area. After the second day of the search, the Federal Bureau of Investigation placed an agent at search headquarters. He told the media that there was no evidence of any foul play, and he was just there to monitor activity. This statement from the FBI will sound extremely familiar to readers of my other books. It almost seems as though the FBI knows that the disappearance fits a profile they are familiar with, and they're there to gather further intelligence about these disappearances. Searchers were concerned because of what the boy was wearing: blue jeans, blue t-shirt, and red sneakers, not warm clothing, for temperatures that dipped down to the 30s at night. Searchers stayed on scene for 5 days, until the effort to find Jamie was scaled back. Unofficially, the search for Jamie lasted almost 10 days. Officially, the search was 5 days.
The effort to
find Jamie produced nothing of evidentiary value. Mrs. Helen Bordenkercher was interviewed in 2007 when she was 81 years old. She stated that the time of the disappearance she felt Jamie might have drowned. As the years have passed and perspective has taken hold, she believes that Jamie didn't drown in the lake but is alive.
She
says it's hard to believe that he was able to walk the distance downhill, cross a busy highway, and get to the lake. Summary: I believe that the important factor in this case was the speed with which Jamie disappeared, nothing that a 2-year-old could accomplish on his own. Mike clearly stated that the front yard swing was still swinging when he came back outside, and Jamie was nowhere in sight. I do not believe that a 2-year-old boy could manipulate himself out of his brother's view and yelling distance in the time that Mike stated he was in the house. The family told law enforcement that they didn't see anyone loitering around their cabin when they arrived, and there was no damage to their cabin when they entered. Their cabin was in a fairly isolated area in 1965, and it would be highly doubtful that a pedophile just happened to be waiting around the back of the house when the Bordenkerchers drove up. If you've read both of my missing 411 books and read about children in the Sierras, you realize how many times kids have vanished and are later found far uphill from where they disappeared. Even the story in this chapter about the May 27, 1951 disappearance of Roger Schattinger and the 1941 disappearance of Clarence Murphy has applicability here. Roger Schattinger disappeared just north of Lake Tahoe and was eventually found 1,000 feet higher in elevation than where he disappeared. That location, sir, prized searchers because Roger disappeared in a location that had a vastly different landscape than the Frog Lake location where he
Was found.
in Missing 411 Western United States. I told the story of 2-year-old David Allen Scott, who disappeared on July 13, 1957, from Mono Village in Bridgeport, California. Searchers scoured the area around his campground and the adjacent lake. It wasn't until searchers climbed an extremely steep mountain adjacent to the camping area and continued to climb over 3,000 feet that they found David's body. I truly don't know how David got to that location, but this is an example of the extreme distances children can somehow travel when they vanish. There are many, many more of these stories. I believe that the searchers did absolutely everything they could at the time, and I'm sure they were crushed that Jamie was never
Found.
The disappearance of Jamie Bordenkircher is another example of how quickly children can disappear.